Some people lead, my father said. Others support. He'd been saying some version of that my entire life. I just never thought he'd say it into a microphone. My name is Jessica Calloway. I'm 31 years old. I grew up in Naperville, Illinois, in a house with a flagpole in the front yard and a whiteboard in the kitchen where my parents tracked my sister Miranda's debate tournament wins in green marker. There was no column for me. I never asked why. Some things you absorb before you're old enough to question them. My father, Robert Calloway, spent 32 years building Calloway Strategic Advisors, a mid-size consulting firm in downtown Chicago that specialized in corporate restructuring. He was not famous. He was not on magazine covers. But in certain rooms, in certain industries, his name meant something. He knew it. He carried it the way some men carry a good watch. Quietly. Deliberately. Ready to show it when the moment was right. My mother, Diane, taught us that value was visible. If you couldn't point to it, it didn't count. Miranda was a vice president at a commercial real estate firm in River North by the time she was 27. Corner office. Company car. Her name on a glass door. You could point to all of it. I was a 5th grade teacher at Brightfield Elementary in Evanston. You could point to that too. My parents just chose not to. Let me tell you how it started. Not the big night, we'll get there. I mean how the pattern started. Because families like mine don't begin with one cruel moment. They begin with 100 small ones. Each one so minor you almost convince yourself it didn't happen. I was 9 years old when my parents enrolled Miranda in an accelerated learning program at Northwestern Summer Institute. She was 12. The program cost $3,400 for the summer. I asked if I could go too. My mother said, "You're not quite ready for that yet, sweetheart." I nodded. I went to day camp instead. I was 13 when my father bought Miranda a laptop for her school projects. A real one, gray, thin with a lit-up apple on the back. I got a hand-me-down desktop that lived in the corner of the family room. I didn't complain. I learned to work on it while everyone watched television. I was 17 when I won an essay competition. 3rd place, regional level, on the topic of public education funding. The prize was a $500 book voucher. I brought the certificate home. My father said, "That's nice, Jess." He was looking at his phone. My mother was on the other side of the kitchen making dinner. Neither of them looked up. Miranda got straight A's that semester. There was a dinner out for that. Ruth's Chris. The good one on Michigan Avenue. None of this was malicious. I want to be honest about that. My parents were not cartoons. They were not twirling their mustaches at night. They were people who had a very specific picture of what success looked like, and Miranda fit inside it and I did not. So, that's the whole thing. And somehow that's enough to reshape a child. There was one more thing. One I haven't mentioned yet because it is both small and not small at all. The year I got my first teaching position at Brightfield, my parents threw a celebration dinner. My mother made the reservation. A nice Italian place in Naperville, white tablecloths, the kind of restaurant that means the occasion is real. I thought for one specific moment in the car on the way there, that this was finally the dinner. My dinner. Miranda was not there. She was at a conference in New York. My father ordered wine. He toasted. He said he was proud. And then within 12 minutes, the conversation turned to Miranda's upcoming promotion. He had heard from someone at her firm. A VP title likely by spring. He talked about it for the rest of the meal. Not unkindly. Not deliberately. He just turned the way a compass needle turns. Toward the thing it's always pointing at. I ate my pasta. I smiled when smiling was appropriate. I drove home and sat in my car in the parking lot of our apartment building for 8 minutes before going inside. I never told Daniel. He would have been angry on my behalf and I didn't want that energy in our apartment. I wanted to keep that anger somewhere it could be useful. Waiting for the moment when it could be converted into something else. Patience, it turns out, is a form of preparation. I met Daniel Park the summer after my sophomore year of college. I was studying education at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He was finishing a master's in computer science at the same school and working part-time as a reading tutor for underserved elementary students through an AmeriCorps program. He was the quietest person I'd ever met who had the most to say. On our 3rd date, we sat in a parking lot outside a Culver's in Champaign for 2 hours after they'd turned the lights off inside, talking about the gap between what public schools promised kids and what they actually delivered. He had a legal pad covered in notes. Numbers mostly. Enrollment rates. Reading level outcomes. Per pupil funding disparities between zip codes. The system isn't broken, he said. It's working exactly as designed. That's worse. I remember the way he said it. Not angry. Just clear. The way someone speaks when they've been turning something over for a long time and have finally arrived at the truth of it. I was 20 years old. I thought I had found the most interesting person on the planet. I was right. We graduated the same spring. I took a teaching position at Brightfield Elementary. He took a junior developer role at an education technology company in Chicago called LearnPath. He lasted 8 months. He came home one Tuesday evening, sat down at our kitchen table, we were living together by then in a 1-bedroom apartment in Rogers Park, and said, "I have an idea. I need to show you something." What he showed me was a mock-up. Hand-drawn on graph paper with measurements written in pencil. An adaptive learning platform designed specifically for 3rd through 6th grade reading intervention. Not a supplement to the classroom. A tool for teachers to use inside the classroom. Built around real pedagogy. Built around what actually works. He'd been building the prototype for 4 months. In the evenings. After his regular job. "I want to call it PathRise," he said. He looked at me carefully. "What do you think?" I looked at the mock-up for a long time. I thought about every student I'd had who could decode words on a page but couldn't hold the meaning of a sentence by the time they reached its end. I thought about the worksheets that went home with them, the ones designed in 1987 that we were still printing because there was nothing better in the budget. I said, "You should quit your job." He laughed. He thought I was joking. I wasn't. This is the part my parents never knew. Or rather, it's the part they never asked about. Daniel incorporated PathRise Education LLC in January of the year we got married. We were 24. I was in my 2nd year at Brightfield. He was working out of our 2nd bedroom, which we had turned into an office with a door that closed and a whiteboard that took up the entire south wall. I did not leave my classroom. That was intentional. Teachers were his users. I was his primary research subject. Every feature he built, I tested in room 14 at Brightfield Elementary with 26 real children who could not read at grade level. I gave him feedback in the evenings. He rebuilt overnight. We had a system. My parents knew he worked in education technology. They knew this because when asked he said so. They did not ask what that meant. They did not ask what the company did or how many schools used it or whether it was growing. They asked once at a family dinner in the 2nd year, whether he was still doing the app thing. He said yes. My mother nodded and turned to Miranda to ask about a deal she was closing. That was the last time the subject came up at a family meal. By year 3, PathRise had contracts with 14 school districts in Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. The platform was serving roughly 9,400 students. Daniel had hired 6 full-time employees, all of them educators or former educators, which was a requirement he built into the company's hiring philosophy. By year 5, they had secured a $1.2 million grant from the Joyce Foundation in Chicago. The announcement was in the Chicago Tribune's education section, a 3-paragraph item on a Thursday morning. I showed my mother. She said, "Oh, that's lovely. Is that a big deal?" I said yes. She said, "Miranda's firm just closed a $47 million commercial lease on the West Loop. Did you see?" I said I hadn't. She said, "I'll send you the article." She did. I read it. Miranda's name was in the 2nd paragraph. I texted her congratulations. She sent back a thumbs up. That was that. I want to tell you about the year before my father's retirement party, because the year before matters. Daniel had been approached by a group of investors out of Austin, a firm called Meridian Capital Partners, who were expanding their education technology portfolio. They were not predators. They were not trying to strip the company. They genuinely believed in what PathRise was doing and wanted to help it scale. They had a track record of ethical investments in the edtech space. Daniel had done 2 years of due diligence before taking a single meeting. The term sheet came through in October. It valued PathRise Education at $28 million. $28 million. For the company my husband had built in our 2nd bedroom on graph paper, over a Culver's parking lot conversation about zip codes and reading scores. He called me from Austin the afternoon the term sheet arrived. I was sitting at my desk at Brightfield, grading reading assessments. He read me the number over the phone. I sat very still. "Jess," he said. I heard you, I said. Are you okay? I'm going to go finish grading, I said. Come home safe. He laughed. That quiet laugh of his that meant everything was going to be fine. I put down the phone and looked out the window of room 14 at the bare trees in the Brightfield schoolyard, and I thought, my father is going to retire in 7 months. He is going to stand at a podium and tell 80 people that I found my level. I thought, let him. The retirement party was held on a Friday evening in late April at the Calloway Strategic Advisors office on the 23rd floor of the Aon Center in downtown Chicago. My father had rented out the firm's event floor, a glass-walled conference room that converted for entertaining, with a view of Lake Michigan on the east side and the skyline on the west. There were 83 guests. I know the number because I counted them later. Seemed important to know. The room was arranged around 8 round tables, each seating 10 with a small raised platform and podium at the north end. There were centerpieces, white orchids in low glass vases, which my mother had chosen because they were tasteful, not showy. There were printed programs with my father's photo on the cover. Robert Calloway, 1991 to 2026, 32 years of excellence. Miranda and her husband Greg arrived 20 minutes before we did. Miranda was in a black dress with architectural shoulders and heels that added 3 inches. She looked the way my mother always hoped daughters looked at events. Composed. Successful. Correctly dressed. She air-kissed my cheek when we arrived and said, "Love your earrings." She did not ask how work was going. I was wearing a navy dress I'd bought 2 years ago and still liked. Daniel was in a charcoal suit and a tie I'd picked out that morning, dark blue, almost black. He looked like what he was, a man who had flown in from a board meeting in Austin at 6 a.m. and was very tired and very calm. He had an envelope in his inside jacket pocket. I'd seen him tuck it in before we left the apartment. I'd asked what it was. He said, "Insurance." I'd looked at him. He'd said, "I'm not going to use it." He'd meant it when he said it. We were seated at table 6. Near the back, not near the window. That had been my mother's doing. She had arranged the seating chart herself. Table 1 was Miranda and Greg, my parents' closest friends, and the Hendersons, who had been my father's first major clients in 1994. Table 2 was Dad's executive team. Table 3 was what my mother called the important ones. Current and prospective clients, the people my father most wanted to impress. At table 3, in the seat closest to the podium, was a man named Arthur Breen. I did not know Arthur Breen's name when I sat down. I learned it later. What I knew, because my mother had mentioned it twice in the weeks before the party, was that Arthur Breen was the managing partner of Breen and Associates, a corporate advisory firm in Austin, Texas. He was, by my mother's description, the most important person in the room. He and my father had been orbiting the same industry circles for 15 years without ever formally working together. My father was hoping to change that. The retirement party was, in part, an audition. Arthur Breen was 62, silver-haired, and had the particular stillness of someone who was very used to being the most important person in any room. He arrived with a woman I assumed was his wife. She was not. She was his chief of staff, I learned, and he shook hands with my father at the door for a long time, the way men do when they're deciding whether they trust each other. I noticed him because my mother kept glancing at him from across the room. I noticed Daniel notice me noticing him. Neither of us said anything. The dinner was served at 7. Filet and salmon and a risotto option. The wine was good, a Napa Cabernet my father had been saving for something important. The conversations around table 6 were pleasant. I spoke with a retired colleague of my father's named Frank Whitmore, who had very strong opinions about golf courses in Scottsdale and very few opinions about anything else. Daniel spoke with Frank's wife, Gloria, who had spent 20 years as a special education coordinator in the Oak Park School District and had genuine, informed things to say about reading intervention in the 3rd grade. I watched Daniel listen to her. Fully. The way he always listened, like he was taking notes even without a pen. At table 3, Arthur Breen was eating and speaking quietly with the man to his left. I couldn't hear them. I watched his face for a moment. He had the kind of expression that doesn't give much away. At 8:15 the speeches began. My father's VP of Operations, a woman named Carol Stern, went first. She spoke for 6 minutes about my father's ability to see the whole board when others only saw individual pieces. She cited 3 specific client wins from the past decade. She had clearly rehearsed. He was good. Miranda went next. She stood at the podium in her architectural dress and she was, and I will say this honestly, genuinely impressive. She spoke without notes. She had 3 stories about my father, each one landing cleanly. She talked about watching him work at the kitchen table when she was 8 years old and understanding even then that he was doing something serious. She said, "Everything I know about negotiation I learned from watching you at that table." There was real warmth in it. The room applauded fully. My mother was wiping her eyes. Then it was my turn. I had 3 minutes. I stood at the podium and I spoke about my father's belief in rigorous thinking. About the whiteboard in the family kitchen which had meant something different to me than it did to Miranda. Not a record of achievement but a model of what it looked like to do the work seriously. I talked about watching him prepare for client presentations late at night, the way he'd go over his arguments out loud to himself, testing them. He taught me, I said, that preparation is not a sign of weakness. It's the discipline that makes the moment possible. It was the most personal thing I'd ever said to my father in public. I meant every word. The room applauded. My father nodded from his seat once. Not warmly. Fairly. I returned to table 6. Daniel put his hand on mine briefly. Then he looked back at the podium. My father was last. He took the podium at 8:45. He was 63 years old, silver at the temples, navy blazer, the same watch he'd worn for 20 years. He was comfortable in front of rooms. He always had been. He thanked Carol. He thanked his executive team. He thanked his clients. He named 8 by company which got a warm response. He thanked my mother at length beautifully. He talked about Miranda for nearly 4 minutes. He named her title. Her firm. A specific deal she'd closed that he clearly had memorized. The room responded warmly. Then he paused. "Jessica," he said. He smiled. It was a kind smile. An honest smile. That's what made it land the way it did. "Jessica found her level," he said. And we're proud of that." He moved on almost immediately. I think it occupied 8 seconds of the speech. But the applause that followed it was uncertain. The kind of applause that doesn't know what it's agreeing to. 83 people clapping because the room expected them to, not because they understood what they were celebrating. I sat very still. Across the table, Gloria Whitmore, Frank's wife, the former special education coordinator, looked at me with an expression I recognized. She had spent 20 years in rooms where people didn't understand what she did. She knew the sound of that applause. I felt Daniel become very still beside me. My father left the podium to a full standing ovation. Not for those 8 seconds, for the 32 years. He deserved it. He had built something real. I stood with everyone else and I clapped and I was, in whatever complicated way these things work, genuinely proud of him. He moved through the room with my mother. They stopped at each table. They shook hands, accepted congratulations, accepted hugs. My mother was luminous. It was her event too, the culmination of a life they'd built together, and she wore it well. They reached table 3 last. I watched my father shake Arthur Breen's hand. Breen stood for it, which I gathered from my mother's earlier descriptions, was not guaranteed. They spoke for a minute, 2 minutes. My father's posture was different at that table. Slightly straighter. More careful. I watched because I could not watch. And while I watched, something shifted. Arthur Breen turned his head. He was looking at our table. Specifically, he was looking at Daniel. He looked at Daniel the way you look at someone you think you recognize but can't immediately place. A long, calibrating look. Then he said something to the man beside him. One of my father's partners, a man named Dennis Holt who'd been with the firm for 18 years. Dennis Holt turned and looked at Daniel too. I felt Daniel's hand move under the table. He reached into his jacket pocket. He did not take the envelope out. He just touched it. The way you check that something is still there. "Daniel," I said quietly. "I see them," he said. It was Dennis Holt who came over first. Dennis was 60, heavy-set, with the blunt manner of someone who had been in business long enough to stop performing social warmth. He pulled up an empty chair from the neighboring table without asking and sat down between Daniel and Gloria Whitmore. "You're Daniel Park," he said. It was not a question. "I am," Daniel said. "Pathrise Education," Dennis said. Daniel paused. "One beat." "Yes." Dennis Holt looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at me. Then back at Daniel. "You flew in this morning." "From Austin," Daniel said. "Board meeting with Meridian Capital." Dennis was quiet. The particular quiet of someone recalibrating something. Robert doesn't know, Dennis said. He hasn't asked, Daniel said. That sentence landed in the air between them and neither of them moved for a moment. Then Dennis stood up. He said, "I'll be right back." He crossed the room to table 3 and leaned down between Arthur Breen and my father and said something. My father glanced toward our table. Breen did not glance. He was already looking. Arthur Breen stood up from table 3. He crossed the room himself. He was not a man who sent proxies for things he could do directly. He stopped at the edge of our table. He looked at Daniel. "Path rise," he said. The word had weight in his mouth. Like he'd been carrying it. "Yes, sir," Daniel said. "I was on a call with Joyce Foundation last Thursday," Breen said. "They mentioned a new cohort for their education initiative. Your name came up 4 times. He looked at Daniel with the careful expression of a man who was doing arithmetic in his head. "You're scaling to 22 districts this fall." 24, Daniel said. "As of this morning." Breen looked at him steadily. "You're Series A. Meridian Capital Partners," Daniel said. The close was Monday. Breen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "And I will remember this exactly. Robert's daughter married you." It was not a question. It was something between amazement and recalculation. The specific expression of a man who has just discovered that the map he was using is wrong. Daniel looked at me. I looked back at him. Then he said quietly to Arthur Breen, "She did." Breen looked at me. A full, genuine look, not the polite half-glance I'd been getting all evening. "You're the teacher," he said. "5th grade," I said. "Brightfield Elementary. Evanston." "You've been running the classroom research component," he said. It was not a guess. "Since the beginning," I said. He absorbed that. Then he said very quietly, "Does your father know what his son-in-law has built?" My father had followed Arthur Breen across the room. He was standing 6 feet away watching this exchange with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Something quieter and more structural than either. The look of someone watching a wall shift. Dennis Holt was behind him. My mother had appeared at his elbow. Miranda was still at table 1. I know because I checked. He was watching. Her husband Greg was watching. Neither of them moved. "Robert," Breen said without turning around, "your son-in-law is Daniel Park." He said it the way you say a sentence that is doing more than one thing at once. "His company, Pathrise Education, closes its Series A this week. $28 million valuation. Joyce Foundation partner. 24 school district contracts as of this morning." He turned and looked at my father directly. "I've been trying to get a meeting with him for 8 months. My father was very still. The table around us had gone quiet. Gloria Whitmore had her hands in her lap. Frank was looking at his wine glass. Dennis Holt was watching my father with the careful expression of a colleague waiting to see what kind of man his friend turned out to be in this moment. Daniel did not say anything. He sat with his hands on the table, calm, and let the room be what the room was. I looked at my father. He was looking at Daniel. Then at me. Then at Daniel again. "I didn't know," he said. Came out smaller than I think he intended. "You never asked," I said. I said it quietly. Not unkindly. Just accurately. My father sat down. He sat down in Frank Whitmore's vacated chair at table 6 at his own retirement party, and he looked at Daniel for a long moment. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the lake was dark and the lights of the city were doing what they always do, being relentlessly, indifferently present. "Tell me," my father said. So Daniel told him. Measured and factual the way Daniel always is. The origin, our second bedroom, the graph paper mock-up. The first school district contract in 2021 Waukegan Unified. The Joyce Foundation grant. The platform's current reach, 23,400 students across 3 states, with the new cohort coming in September. The Meridian deal. The board meeting that morning in Austin. He spoke for 6 minutes. He did not gloat. He did not perform. He said at the end, "Jessica's classroom was our first research site. Every feature we built went through her students first. The product works because she told us what didn't." My father looked at me. I looked back at him. I thought about the whiteboard in the kitchen with Miranda's debate wins in green marker. I thought about the laptop I didn't get. I thought about the essay certificate and the way neither of them had looked up. I thought about the 8 seconds of that speech and the uncertain applause, and the way Gloria Whitmore had looked at me across the table with her careful eyes. I said, "I found my level, Dad. You were just looking at the wrong floor." The room was quiet. Not the whole room. The event was still going, music was playing softly, conversations were continuing at the far tables. But our corner of table 6 was very still. My mother, standing at my father's shoulder, said nothing. She was looking at me with an expression I could not fully read, something between chagrin and the beginning of a longer reckoning that would take more time than this evening held. Arthur Breen looked at Daniel and said, "I'd like to schedule time next week. Properly." He said it to Daniel, but he was also, in some register, saying it in front of my father. He was choosing, in his precise and deliberate way, which of these people he wanted to know. Daniel said, "My assistant will reach out Monday morning." Breen nodded. Then he looked at my father one more time, that same calibrating look, and returned to table 3. Dennis Holt put his hand briefly on my father's shoulder. Then he went back to his seat. My father remained at table 6. I want to tell you what the room looked like in those seconds after I said it. The city through the windows. The white orchid centerpieces. 83 people in various states of continuing their evenings. Eating the last of the dessert course, refilling wine glasses, checking phones under the table in the way people do when they think no one sees. And at table 6, my father sitting in Frank Whitmore's chair looking at his hands. My mother standing at his shoulder very still. Dennis Holt watching. Arthur Breen already turned back toward table 3 but not yet seated. Daniel across from me, calm in the way he has always been calm, not cold, not detached. Just present. Settled in his own skin. And me. I had been preparing for that sentence for 7 years. Not the exact sentence, I hadn't scripted it. But the readiness for it. The groundwork. The patience that my parents had always read as passivity, as smallness, as finding her level. I said it and it was quiet and it was true and then it was over. He didn't apologize that night. I want to be accurate about that. He sat with us for the remainder of the party, another 40 minutes, and he spoke with Daniel with the careful attention of someone learning a language they should have started earlier. He asked questions. Real ones. About the platform architecture, about the school district procurement process, about the Meridian relationship. Daniel answered all of them. Completely. Without edge. My father is not a warm man, but he is, at his core, a serious one. When he decides something matters, he treats it like it matters. I watched him make that decision in real time and I felt, I won't pretend otherwise, both vindicated and exhausted in equal measure. My mother stayed at her post near the door for the rest of the event, accepting final congratulations from departing guests. She did not come back to table 6. I did not go to her. Miranda found me at coat check. She was holding both our jackets. She handed mine over and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I knew." I looked at her. She said, "I knew what Daniel had built. I've known for a year. I saw the Tribune article." She paused. I didn't say anything. I looked at my sister. She had always fit the picture. She had never had to fight for the column on the whiteboard. I don't know what it cost her to stand in that or whether it cost her anything at all. I'm not sure I'll ever know. I said, "I know." She said, "I'm sorry." I said, "Okay." It wasn't enough. It wasn't meant to be. It was a beginning of something that would take years if it happened at all. I put on my coat and I left. Daniel and I drove home through the city. The lake was on our right, black and enormous. The radio was off. I had my head against the window. "You okay?" Daniel said. "I'm thinking," I said. He let me think. That's one of the things about Daniel. He has always known when a thing is done and when it's still in motion. I was thinking about my father's face when he sat down at table 6. The smallness of those 3 words. I didn't know. The way a person can spend 30 years assigning value to things they've never examined, and then sit in a rented event space on the 23rd floor and discover at 63 that they were wrong. I was thinking about my classroom. Room 14. 26 children this year. 8 of them reading 2 or more grade levels below where they should be when September started. 3 of them are now at grade level. One of them, a kid named Marcus who came to me unable to hold the beginning of a sentence by the time he reached its end, is reading chapter books on his own. That happened because of what Daniel built. What I helped build. In our second bedroom. On graph paper. My father has spent 32 years restructuring corporations. He knows the difference between something that works and something that only looks like it works. I think somewhere in that room he finally saw the difference. The call came 9 days later. It was a Sunday evening. I was grading at the kitchen table, the same table where Daniel had shown me the original mock-up 7 years ago on graph paper. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was my father. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. He said, "I've been thinking about what to say." I said, "Take your time." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I owe you more than an apology. I know that. I'm not going to pretend a phone call fixes it." Another pause. I need you to know I understand what I missed. What I was looking past. He stopped. "You built something real, Jessica. You and Daniel both." "Yes," I said. "We did." "I'd like to understand it better," he said. "If you'll let me." I held the phone and I looked at the whiteboard we keep in our kitchen now. Daniel's whiteboard, covered in product roadmaps and feature notes and the names of school districts in blue marker. The names of places where children are reading who weren't reading before. "I'll think about it," I said. He said, "That's fair." We stayed on the line for another minute in a silence that was not comfortable but was honest. Then I said, "Good night, Dad." He said good night. I ended the call. I sat for a while at the kitchen table. Then I picked up my red pen and went back to grading. In September of that year, Pathrise Education launched its fall cohort, 24 school districts across Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, and for the first time Ohio. The platform was serving 31,700 students. The first employee Daniel hired from the new Austin expansion was a former student of mine. A young woman named Priya Sharma who had been in my third grade class 8 years earlier, who had struggled with reading comprehension all through elementary school, and who had graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a degree in educational psychology. She started on a Monday. She called me the night before. She said, "I keep thinking about room 14. I said, "Me too." She said, "I don't know if I would have made it without that class." I said, "You made it. I just handed you the tools." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Is that what it feels like? Being a teacher?" I thought about it honestly. "Sometimes," I said. "On the best days, yes." I went back to school that fall. Room 14. New 26. The trees outside the window just starting to turn. The first morning back I stood at the classroom door and watched them file in. Backpacks too big for their bodies, shoes that lit up. The particular chaos of 26 people who have spent the summer becoming slightly different versions of themselves. They sat down. They looked at me. I looked back at them. I have never once regretted my level.